keeping with American politics, my last video was obviously about Trump and Trumpism, and I'm going to try not to mention him too much in these videos, where I want to focus more on the other side, on the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris. This video not so much about Harris, more about the party that she's now the nominee uh, for. Um, because I've mixed views on the Democratic Party now. Disclaimer here: if I was an American, I would almost certainly be a Democrat because when I look at both parties, I just find so much more common ground with the Democrats and the Republicans. But the important thing to bear in mind here is they're both big political parties, and they have different factions, and they have both got quite long histories. But there's positions that the Democrats have that I just find myself much more comfortable with overall. Having said that, there are also things I dislike about the Democratic Party. And what I'm going to do in this video is address both sides, um, because I do feel that they're probably going to win in November. I'm cautiously optimistic. Obviously, I want them to win. I want Trump to be defeated. Um, but I thought it would be appropriate to just touch on what I like and dislike about the Democratic Party. Um, I think some great American presidents have been Democrats. Franklin D. Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama. All these presidents had significant achievements. And yes, I include Lyndon Johnson, controversial president. Vietnam was a disaster. But for Trump's boasts about being the greatest president since Lincoln for black Americans, it was Lyndon Johnson that passed the Civil Rights Act. And I think, in some ways, Johnson, like Tony Blair in Britain, is a leader who will forever be overshadowed. His record will forever be overshadowed by a disastrous foreign war, and that's really a pity because I think Johnson was a formidable leader in many ways. But you know, he has blood on his hands for what happened in Vietnam, no question about that. But I'd be real on that issue. FDR, the president that got America out of the Great Depression, World War II leader. Um, FDR's record wasn't perfect. It was under his watch that there was Japanese internment. But I think you need to give FDR a lot of credit. Um, John F. Kennedy, short presidency, maybe not long enough to really prove himself. I think it wasn't just for me the sort of optimism that he brought, the kind of the new frontier and all of that. I think he was a good leader, and I think he done his level best to address the issues of the day. He ignited the space race, he ignited the optimism for the 60s. I think had JFK been able to do a second term, he would have achieved so much. There were limitations to the situation that he was in. It was still very much the Jim Crow era. It was the height of the civil rights movement. JFK had limitations, and he had flaws. He was a womanizer. In those days, there was a more deferential press. I think Kennedy would have maybe struggled in that sense today, but I think he was highly intelligent and a formidable leader, and certainly not far left. I think some have even argued JFK was a conservative. Um, Bill Clinton, again, a lot of his personal scandals came into that legacy, but I think Bill Clinton formidable in the sense of his communication skills, in the sense of, I mean, look at the 1996 elections. It's a rare example of a president actually doing better than, when he came to the White House. And in 1992, Bill Clinton should have been the underdog. You know, he was deemed to be a draft dodger. He was going against a fairly popular president, not as popular as Reagan, but Bush should have been rolling on the success of the first Gulf War. And then Bill Clinton comes in and gets a comfortable victory. Bill Clinton's third way politics, I think, was very appealing. Um, he had charisma. At the end of the day, he had a lot of charisma. Barack Obama needs no introduction. Um, Perhaps disappointing to some, but I think Obama was also a transformative president and a consequential president, not just because he was the first black president, but because of um, what his presidency done in terms of dealing with the Great Recession and well, particularly that, but also dealing with the rise of China and other things that were going on in the world at that time. Obama may have disappointed some, maybe he could have been a greater president, but I certainly think he's above average. Um, then there's other Democrats who are more forgettable. I don't think Jimmy Carter will go down as a great president. Probably too early to say with Biden. I don't think he's going to go down as a great president. Um, Woodrow Wilson, he will be associated with the League of Nations and being the leader during World War One, but today he's more controversial because of his basically racist views. Andrew Jackson, again, Jacksonian democracy, but with Andrew Jackson, he's associated with a Trail of Tears. So I think often historic assessments of presidencies are often influenced by the way model of thinking in the era in which they're, those assessments are done. For example, had there been an assessment of Woodrow Wilson in the 20s or the 30s, it probably would have held him up very highly. Today, not so much because of his record on race. Um, and some Republicans, Ulysses S. Grant, are now held in higher regard. Um, Another famous example of this, Harry Truman had famously low approval ratings when he left the White House. Now well in the upper quartile of presidents. So presidential legacy is something that is interesting. I don't think Donald Trump will ever rank highly because of the events of January the 6th, 2021. I think that is unprecedented. I cannot see any academic study really factoring in Trump very highly, um, regardless of what he might have achieved in the White House, because what happened, his refusal to concede graciously, his pushing of conspiracy theories are so dangerous for democracy. I think it just damages legacy for good. But anyway, so I don't think it's going to be a case of, oh well, Harry Truman's popularity bounced back, George W. Bush's popularity somewhat bounced back. Bush is now kind of seen as an average president, whereas he was deeply unpopular at points in the 2000s. Um, Rightly or wrongly, he's now seen as a statesman compared to Bush. Compared to, excuse me, I've made several videos in a row. He's now seen as a statesman compared to Trump, and that's saying something. So I'm going to touch on basic points here. I'm not going to delve into really, really deep content with this, just touch on it. What I dislike about the Democratic Party. Um, Frankly, the wokeism. I do not like the identity politics that the Democrats push. I do not like the fact that they preach about tolerance and being anti hate, but they simultaneously push divisive and polarizing terms like white privilege. Frankly, they push trans dogma. In California, um, apparently, there's a new law that I understand if I've got this right, and people can perhaps correct this if I'm interpreting this wrong. But schools are legally prohibited from telling parents about the self-announced gender of young students. I mean, that sort of trans militant dogma the Democrats have been pushing. That's not reassuring to young women when they simultaneously to be all about women's rights. Um, the abortion thing, I think some of the extreme positions the red states take on abortion, threatening even the death penalty for women who would have an abortion or doctors who would perform it is extreme. It's like kind of a Christian Taliban. Having said that, the Democrats should be careful about not showing themselves to be enthusiastically pro-abortion. I think that this is one of those rare issues. I genuinely see both sides. I think that where the woman's health is impacted, where she's been a victim of rape or incest, and where her health is concerned, actually her safety, then definitely abortion should be an option. But I don't think it should be something that's kind of glorified. And I certainly would be uneasy with late stage abortion where the fetus is largely developed, where its organs are developed. That's not, for me, that's not a religious point of view, that's a biological point of view, where it's, I would be very uneasy with termination at that point. But I don't think Roe v. Wade was proposing that. I think that it's, you know, so I just think the Democrats need to be careful that when they talk about pro-choice, they're not kind of portraying that they're because one of the things that gets into this debate, and the when it gets really heated, it's like, oh well, you're baby killers. That's coming from the pro-choice side, and then the left will say, oh, you're woman haters, and both sides are wrong about that. I think. Um, Understanding that women may need access to abortion to save their lives doesn't make them baby killers, particularly when the fetus isn't fully developed. But people being uncomfortable with abortion, including, by the way, many women, when the fetus is largely developed, that doesn't make them misogynist either. So I find it unfortunate that with the abortion debate, both sides vilify one another. Um, and frankly, Democrat women have to stop vilifying Republicans who are uncomfortable with abortion um, as being woman haters or something. I don't think it's that simple. I do not like the way the Democrats weaponize race, and they do. Um, there is frankly a serious problem in America with, and it's the same in Britain, where you get young black men involved in gang violence in the inner cities. I mean, the south side of Chicago, for example, um, could at times resemble a war zone. Smaller cities, St. Louis, New Orleans, Baltimore, have serious, serious problems with violent crime. These are all Democrat run cities. And whilst the Democratic record on crime is not necessarily one of being soft on crime, there are in fact Democrats who are quite hard line on crime, including Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and Kamala Harris. If you look at the record, it's actually not soft on crime. Um, but the thing is, the record of the Democrats, as a party, it is perceived to be soft on crime. Now, I don't think that's entirely fair because they're the party who's been trying to do something about gun violence, and I'll come to that on the other side, the flip side of this video. But the simple reality is Democrat-run cities have soaring crime levels, and you cannot blame all of that on Donald Trump. There's a problem there, particularly when they are often sanctuary cities. You can't totally divorce those two things. Um, I think the Democrats need to basically speak up on crime. When the George Floyd riots were happening, Biden did say, look, we condemn the violence and people who are breaking the law should be arrested. So unlike Donald Trump, he never incited the violence. Nancy Pelosi can't say the same thing for her. There were times she made some very dubious statements during that violence. If I was a small business owner and I'd been looted, I'd be furious about it. Um, I think it is very questionable that George Floyd, a career criminal, was held up as some sort of folk hero because he happened to be on the receiving end of police brutality. I mean, I'm disgusted by what happened to him, but that doesn't mean he should be held up as some sort of hero. The way the left held him up as such, very dubious. Um, so I think that when the Democrats push racial politics, they have to acknowledge that there is a problem with black criminality in America. It's a problem with white criminality as well. But the point I'm making here is when that is called out, that's not racism. It's saying that there is, in fact, a problem with black on white crime in America. It's just a reality. Um, that's not to say that there isn't innocent black Americans who falsely get accused, who are victims of miscarriages of justice and police brutality. Of course there is. But frankly, there is a problem in America's big cities with black gangs. It's just a reality. And Hispanic gangs in the case of California. There is a problem with MS-13 infiltrating the border. That doesn't mean that all migrants should be vilified, but there is a problem there. And I think the Democrats are so hung up on race that they cannot understand people have legitimate fears about crime. So it's one thing I really don't like about them. Their attitude to race is one of its reactionary offense at everything. Um, there is racism in America, no question about it. But I'm not convinced that some of the things the Democrats propose is the answer to that. Affirmative action historically has been important. It's been necessary. because of segregation. So I totally understand that. But I am not convinced that telling children, for example, that if they're a minority, they're perpetual victims, and if they're white, they're perpetual um, perpetrators. I don't think that is helpful for building bridges. Telling people they've got white privilege isn't helpful. So I think the woke left is deeply intolerant, and I think they show this time and time again. That's what I don't like about the Democrats, because you will find that a lot more in the Democratic Party than the other side. Now, the flip side, what do I like about the Democrats? I mentioned sort of in my analysis of those presidents. Um, there's been obviously impressive Republican presidents as well. Lincoln is the obvious example, Teddy Roosevelt. But I think, it's kind of like I feel this way about the Tories and Labour as well. Somehow, despite all the disagreements I have, I just find myself resonating more with Labour overall than the Tories overall. In the American situation, it's more pronounced. I find it a lot easier to say I can resonate with the Democrats, because the things I would care about if I was an American citizen, in fact, probably the number one thing above anything, and I know this isn't a priority for everyone, but the gun violence issue. Not long ago, my niece and nephews were over there, and they were involved in a mall shooting incident. Now, the situation was contained, it was an active shooter. Thankfully, no one was killed on that occasion, but I know my brother and his wife were absolutely, you know, their children were involved in that situation. They had to hide, I understand, in a bathroom of the mall. Um, the fact that gun violence is so normalized in the States, and the fact that the Republicans and good number of Democrats as well, that the Second Amendment is almost like a religion. The founding fathers wrote about well-regulated militias. They did not write about every man, woman, and child should have access to a weapon that should be on the battlefield. I cannot comprehend how you see these mass shootings where children are gunned down in a school, and the Republican answer to it is, oh, it's terrible, thoughts and prayers, but we're not going to do anything to change the situation. What I like about the Democrats is they at least try. Bill Clinton, one of the good things his administration done was bringing an assault weapons ban, and it wasn't perfect. But if you look at the number of mass shootings that took place in Clinton's watch, some of his Republican successors, um, it was far less. There was Columbine, which stood out because it was awful. But under Republican presidents and a Republican controlled Congress, that's been happening so frequently, and similar situations. Democrats, for all their faults, they at least try to do something about this. I would argue the Republicans are soft on gun crime. They're soft on it because they want to pander to the NRA. So that's something I like about the Democrats. I like the fact that they regard healthcare as a human right. The Republicans don't. You know, again, the Democrats try to push for universal healthcare. Obamacare is far from perfect, but at least it was a move in the right direction. At least it was a recognition that healthcare should be a human right. And the most powerful country in the world, um, it's ridiculous that there's people who cannot, they're suffering because they cannot have access to healthcare. That's disgraceful. Um, I'm not going to say the Democrats don't pander to big money, because there are billionaire Democrats. I think big money is an issue in American politics in general. I do think the Democrats are more likely to stand up for labor rights. I do think the Democrats are more likely to stand up for, stand against big corporations than the Republicans are. Again, that's refreshing. Um, Indeed, in this campaign, Donald Trump, we had that meeting with Elon Musk. You won't see Harris doing that. I think that's refreshing. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I really do dislike the wokeism. But if I was an American citizen, I would still vote Democratic. Why? Because it is a big party, and I think there's a lot of level-headed Democrats who don't pander to the far left. They're not ultra woke. Um, who don't go around talking about, respect my pronouns, or, what's your white privilege and all that sort of stuff. I think there's a lot of Democrats who are, quite level headed. So, Next video, I'm going to be talking more specifically about Harris and this year's DNC. Um, but that's my take on the Democratic Party. I haven't even mentioned the Republican Party on the grounds or not much because I think it's been hijacked by Trump. I think it's now Trump's party, and I think decent Republicans like Mitt Romney and a few others have basically been pushed out in everything but name. That's why I'm talking about the Democratic Party because they're in power now, and you know their record is certainly nothing triumphalist. They've made serious mistakes. There's areas they could have done better, but for me, I think they at least have tried to do something about the issue of gun violence. They at least have tried to do something about access to healthcare. These are very, very important things. That's how I see it.